The reporters in the back. I would ask that we start out with local reporters, and then if we've got time afterwards, we'll go to the national folks. Sir.
Hey, Jeff Moore, Carolina Journal. Thanks for being here. I saw you at a football game this weekend. I'm wondering, as you work your way across the country, what your impression is about your interactions with voters in North Carolina and the policy successes of North Carolina over these last 10 or 15 years. Do you draw any inspiration there that you would like to take up to D.C.?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I guess my takeaway from North Carolina voters is, look, you guys have a great spirit here in North Carolina. You go to I went to the ECU App State game. What do they call it? The cross state rivalry. Is that what? So I went there and people were fired up. They were excited. And unlike an Ohio State Michigan game, nobody was fighting each other at the ECU App State game. So what I took away from that is that people here, they love their state. They love their football teams, but they can disagree with one another. They can argue about a football game or argue about politics and still be on the same American family. And I think that's a very unique and great thing about North Carolina. This is a state on the move. Right? This is a state with ambitious people. A lot of the folks that I meet, another takeaway from some of the folks I talked to in North Carolina is a lot of folks came here from other states. Right, there are a lot of North Carolina natives, but there are a lot of people who have transplanted here because of the great job opportunities. So this is a state where we're optimistic about the future, and I think people here recognize better than anybody that we are ready to unleash a great period of American spirit and American innovation. We just got to fire the current occupants of the White House and get somebody better in there. But a thing that I'll take from North Carolina, because I've invested in companies in North Carolina before, and I care a lot about, and I've focused a lot on what's going on in innovation and technology here. I think North Carolina has shown that if you have common sense economic policies and you've got common sense energy policies, you can build an economy that is rapid, growing, and really, really exciting for all the residents here. But we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that if we've got broken federal policies in Washington, D.C. I mean, one way of thinking about the fundamental difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's economic policies is that Kamala Harris wants to do the same old things that we've been doing. She just wants to bring in a lot of cheap labor to do it. Think about that. What is 25 million illegal aliens about? That's about cheap labor. And why does she want to subsidize shipping American jobs overseas? Because a Chinese slave will work for cheaper than an American middle-class worker. What do Donald Trump and I want to do? We want to build the economy of the future with American workers, American innovation, and American manufacturing. I think North Carolina is primed to be at the lead of that if we get the leadership we need. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Sydney McCoy with Spectrum News 1. So North Carolina has a lot of businesses, but we also have a lot of retirees, and that's expected to grow as well. So do you guys have a plan to increase or decrease taxes on 401ks, especially for retirees?
Well, one of the things the president just came out with last week, actually, is eliminating taxes on Social Security income, which, of course, would be huge for a lot of our retirees. And I think that, look, we have to recognize that as much as everybody has suffered under Kamala Harris's affordability crisis, the people who've often suffered the most, it's very often our grandparents, right? Because they're living on a fixed income. They can't just go out at 72 and get another job when times get really tight. They're not able to work as easily anymore, and we've got to respect that and we've got to recognize that. We've also, because of the fentanyl that Kamala Harris has allowed to come across the southern border, we've got a lot of retirees who are taking care of kids who have been orphaned by this drug epidemic, taking care of kids they weren't planning to take care of. And we love them for it, and we're grateful to them for it, but we've got to do a better job of supporting our grandparents, especially those who are taking care of families they weren't expecting to take care of. And you think about what it means to take care of a family on a fixed income when Kamala Harris's policies have led to groceries being 25% higher. That is a disaster for retirees across the state of North Carolina. Or let's say, you want to take a vacation, you want to drive down to Florida, drive down to Alabama, to Gulf Shores, where I know a lot of people from North Carolina and Ohio, or you want to go out to the Outer Banks, but now gasoline is 35% higher than it was 3 years ago. There are a lot of people canceling vacations, canceling family meals, and canceling plans for the future because of this inflation. That is the best thing that we can do for our retirees, is to cut it out, get back to common sense economic policies, and make America affordable again, especially for our retirees.
Senator Vance, AP Dillon,
Yes,
North
ma'am.
State Journal. Thank you for taking my question. You had talked earlier about energy independence. Could you expand on that just a little bit more? Are we talking opening up gas leases, or what does that have an impact for North Carolina, and how will that impact basically the eastern coast?
Well, there are a few different things that we have to do. Number one, the Harris campaign, or the Harris vice presidency, has imposed a number of power plant regulations that are absolutely nonsensical and raise the cost of energy for North Carolina consumers. The second thing is we've got a lot of natural gas capacity all across our country. We don't have the pipelines to get this stuff where it needs to go. And Kamala Harris has got to stop shutting down pipelines. We need to be opening up pipelines, lowering costs for American consumers and everybody else. I want to make one more point just very specifically, because people very often don't realize the connection between energy and food prices. And it's connected in a whole host of ways. But you know one other way it's connected is, do you know what the main fertilizer that we're using in our farms is derived from natural gas? So if you jack up the cost of natural gas, you're going to make farming more expensive. You're going to make food more expensive. And you want to know something really crazy and should scare all of us? As much as we've got going on in this country, we've got some very serious crises, and this is maybe the biggest. You know, when the very first time, I believe in the history of this country, that we became a net food importer? And you know what that means? That means that we're eating more food than we're growing. We've always grown more food than we've eaten in this country. You know, the first full year that we became a country where we eat more than we grow, 2023, under the policies of Kamala Harris. So it's bad for our farmers, it's bad for anybody who goes to the grocery store, but this is a massive national security issue. The dumbest decision, I'm 40 years old, the dumbest decision made by American leadership in my lifetime was they decided that we didn't need to make our own stuff anymore. So a lot of things, from the ibuprofen to the antibiotics to the manufactured goods, a lot of this stuff is made in China or somewhere else. It's a disgrace, and we've got to stop it. But if it was a mistake to ship our industrial base off to China, then isn't it an even bigger mistake to ship our food supply to countries that very often hate us? This is craziness. So our plan is very simply manufacture more in the United States of America, grow more food in the United States of America, self-reliance, American jobs for American workers. That is the path to prosperity and also to national security. Thank you. Ma'am.
Hi, Senator. Lucille Sherman with Axios Raleigh. You mentioned food and manufacturing industries. Deporting migrant workers could have a significant impact on a state like North Carolina, which relies on migrant workers for hog farming, crop harvesting, construction, and more. How would your administration address that?
Well, first of all, if you talk to farmers, farmers are as upset about the open border as almost anybody else. So I think farmers, and certainly I, reject the idea that the only way to have a productive farm economy is to allow 25 million illegal aliens into this country. It doesn't make an ounce of sense. Again, we cannot import cheap labor. We cannot import 25 million illegal aliens and expect that that is going to be the path to prosperity. It doesn't work like that, and we've now tried this for 3.5 years. Think about it. The Kamala Harris argument is that if you let in millions upon millions of low-wage illegal laborers, that is going to make everybody better off. Well, she's been running that experiment for the last 3.5 years, and I don't think many of us feel better off, do we? So let's try a different approach, lean into the future, but do it with American workers and American products. Thank you all. Ma'am.
Hi, Senator. Vivian Salama from the Wall Street Journal. Thanks for bringing us along. I have a quick big picture and then one on news of the day, if that's okay.
Sure.
Just in terms of you joining the ticket with Donald Trump, with President Trump, before you were a senator and you had your own independent views, some of which were a little bit different than his, maybe even a bit more conservative. Similarly, Vice President Harris was a senator, and you know, she joined the ticket. She was a candidate briefly. She had a bit more left-leaning views than President Biden, and when she joined the ticket, she also moderated to be in line with him. So how do you distinguish between the two? Obviously, there is some daylight between what you were saying before and now that you're on the ticket. what you're saying as part of the Trump-Vance team, similar to the vice president. So how do you distinguish that?
So that's the first question. Second question is?
Really quickly, just on the Fed cutting. It's a very Wall Street Journal-y question, but the Fed cut the interest rate today by 0.5 percentage point. Going to alleviate inflation for a lot of people. And so if you have any reaction to that, we'd love it.
Well, look, my reaction is my reaction is a 0.5 point is nothing compared to what American families have been dealing with for the last 3 years. You know, when Donald Trump left office, a lot of Americans were getting 3-4% mortgages. Now they're getting 8% mortgages. A 0.5 point is not going to help those families a whole lot. It's better than nothing. But again, the reason why we have sky-high inflation, the reason why we have high interest rates is because Kamala Harris cast the deciding vote on the Inflation Explosion Act, and then she tried to do everything she could to shut down American energy. So Americans are suffering from this stuff, and the fact that the Fed is going to give them a little relief in the midst of an election, by the way, is nothing compared to the disaster that Kamala Harris's policies have caused in this country. So on your first question about, look, daylight between me and President Trump and Kamala Harris's daylight between Biden. First of all, there's one big difference on this account. And look, yes, I have changed my mind on things over the years. You know, the difference between me and Kamala Harris is I actually stand in front of the American people and explain why. If you There's nothing wrong with changing your mind in this country, but when you change your mind, you ought to explain to the American people why. It's that simple, and that is the big difference. Now, look, of course, do I agree with President Trump on every single issue? Of course, nobody agrees with any person on every single issue. You know what the difference is between me and President Trump? Number one, he got millions and millions of Republican primary voters. He is the leader of this party, and he sets the agenda. So, of course, So look, of course, the difference, and it's funny that Democrats want to focus on this, the big difference between President Trump and Kamala Harris is votes. He actually got the votes of Republican primary voters, and Kamala Harris never did. And again, the problem with Kamala Harris, if she wants to say she changed her mind, then she is entitled to do that, but only if she stands before the American people and explains why. Stop running from the media, Kamala. They won't bite. Answer some questions. Ma'am.
Hi, Senator. Christine Zhu from NC Newsline. So over the weekend, you went on Meet the Press to talk about what a proposed health care plan would look like under the Trump administration.
Sure.
Could you go into more detail about this specifically for North Carolinians and how it helped lower costs?
Yeah, well, step back for a little bit. And the problem with American health care is actually that it works really well for most Americans and it works really poorly for a lot, right? So if you don't have major health problems, if you just go to the doctor a few times a year to check in, maybe if you got, the flu or something like that, American health care actually works okay. But if you've got a serious condition, if you've got a chronic condition, that's where American health care is a complete disaster. And whether you're getting health care at the Veterans Administration, whether you're on Medicare, or whether you have private insurance, health care, if you've got a chronic condition, is a really, really significant problem. And we have got to fix health care for everybody, right? And look, the problem with what we've seen over the last few years is I talk to a lot of people, and the biggest complaint they have is they are paying more and more for health insurance premiums, and they're getting less and less out of it. Now, again, if you only go to the doctor once a year for a physical, maybe that doesn't bother you as much. But if you're going to the doctor 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times a year, our healthcare system is a disaster, and we have got to fix it. We really do. Now, in terms of specific plans, look, the biggest problem with our healthcare system right now is that you have a lot of federal regulations that don't make sense for the healthcare system that we actually have. That's number one. Number two, and so we're gonna actually implement some regulatory reform in the healthcare system that allows people to choose a health care plan that works for them. If you only go to the doctor once a year, you're going to need a different health care plan than somebody who goes to the doctor 14 times a year because they've got chronic pain or they've got some other chronic condition. That's the biggest and most important thing that we have to change. Now, what that will also do is allow people with similar health situations to be in the same risk pools, so that makes our healthcare system work better. It makes it work better for the people with chronic issues. It also makes it work better for everybody else. Now, we also have to remember Donald Trump doesn't just have a plan on this stuff. Donald Trump has a record. And actually, when Donald Trump, even though Kamala Harris likes to take credit for this, it was Donald Trump who got the $35 insulin that made insulin affordable for American consumers. And the final point I make on this, one of the most expensive, significant healthcare costs in our country is, of course, prescription drugs. And remember what President Trump has said repeatedly, something that for some reason the Harris talks a lot about lowering the cost of drugs, but she never goes here, and the reason she doesn't go here is because she is in the pocket of Big Pharma. And what Donald Trump has said is that Europeans are paying way less for prescription drugs than Americans are. We should let companies bring in drugs from Europe, lower the cost of prescriptions for American consumers, and make everybody better off and healthier in the process. Ma'am.
Hi, Senator. Mia McCarthy with Politico. Question for you about the Haitian migrants in Springfield. So I know you've talked a lot about how we need to deport illegal aliens, but I wanted to ask you, the majority of the Haitians in Springfield came under TPS, so they are here legally. And I know you've expressed a lot of your issues with the TPS program and wanting to change that under a Trump-Vance administration. But I guess my question for you is, if you become the vice president under a Trump administration, what will you guys do about the migrants that are already there, since they did arrive legally? And a follow-up to that, if you plan to deport them, how would you do that legally?
Well, look, this is a media and Kamala Harris fact check that I want to clarify and clear up right now. And here's now, the media loves to say that the Haitian migrants, hundreds of thousands of them, by the way, 20,000 in Springfield, but hundreds of thousands of them all across our country, they are here legally. And what they mean is that Kamala Harris used two separate programs, mass parole and temporary protective status. She used two programs to wave a wand and to say, we're not going to deport those people here. Well, if Kamala Harris waves the wand illegally and says these people are now here legally, I'm still going to call them an illegal alien. An illegal action from Kamala Harris does not make an alien legal. That is not how this works. And again, I want to focus our attention, my friends, on how much the media is gaslighting us and lying to us about this. Parole. We have, let's get into the weeds a little bit, we have a parole power in our immigration laws. And what that means is the president or the vice president can use the power to basically say, this one person, we are going to parole them from complying with our immigration laws on a case-by-case basis. Now, maybe there's some reason. Maybe it's somebody helped us overseas and their life is in imminent danger. You can parole that person. What is fundamentally illegal is for Kamala Harris to say, we're going to grant parole, not on a case-by-case basis, but to millions of illegal aliens who are coming into this country. That does not magically make them legal because Kamala Harris waved the amnesty wand. That makes her border policy a disgrace, and I'm still going to call people illegal aliens. And just think about the shamelessness required from Kamala Harris. Temporary protective status. That is Kamala Harris through a government edict saying you're not allowed to deport people anymore. Those Border Patrol agents who want to do their job, that's Kamala Harris saying you are not allowed to deport people anymore. So Kamala Harris says you can't deport people, and then she says you're also now legal instead of illegal. That is completely bogus. That is straight out of George Orwell. None of us buy it. And here's the final point that I'll make on this. Who consented? Who in this room, who in this country consented to allowing millions of aliens to come into this country unchecked, unvetted? None of us did. None of us did. And the game the media has played here, again, this two-step that Kamala Harris does, I think it's the most disgraceful thing that she has done in her entire campaign. She's going to say, on the one hand, we're going to let in millions of illegal aliens to make your housing costs higher, to make your hospitals overwhelmed, to make your local schools impossible for your children to learn in. She's going to do that, and on the other hand, if you dare complain about it, you are a racist. Kamala Harris, I think that's disgraceful. You ought to have respect enough for your own people to enforce their border laws and listen to them. Listen to them when they complain about it. Don't pretend they're bad people. And look, I think I speak for every person in here, and I think I speak for a lot of people, a lot of undecided voters, but certainly a lot of Republicans, independents, and Democrats who are voting for Donald Trump. We are allowed, under the First Amendment to this country, to tell our leaders that they're doing a bad job. We are allowed, Kamala Harris, to tell you you got to stop importing millions of low-wage foreigners into our country. We're allowed, Kamala Harris, to tell you you can't jack up the cost of housing by giving foreigners homes instead of American citizens. We're not bad people for loving this country. You're a bad person for doing this to the country in the first place. Thank you. Well, I don't think I can top that one, everybody, so I think that was the last question. Let me just leave you with one final thought. So I am asked pretty much everywhere I go, how are you doing? And I know that question comes from a very incredible and kind place. Of course, we've got a crazy political atmosphere, and people are asking me how I'm doing. But look, I'm doing great. Don't ever worry about me. This is one of the greatest opportunities, the greatest honors I've ever had in my life. Now, and I appreciate that, sir. I need your prayers. And, I talked to the president on Sunday. I've talked to him since then, of course, too. But on Sunday around 1:45, I was sitting at home with my son, my 7-year-old, and the president calls me, and he says, JD, they just tried to do it again. I said, they did what? He said, they tried to shoot me again. And he kind of told me the story of what would then become public a couple hours later. And, of course, my first thought was, sir, are you okay? I mean, my God, I can't believe this has happened. Physically, clearly he was okay, or he wouldn't have been calling me. But, you just ask when something traumatic happens, are you doing okay? And, of course, the president was doing just fine. He was laughing and joking. It happened 5 minutes earlier. He hears the gunshots rang out on the golf course, and he's, joshing it up just a few minutes later. And the thing that he said was, well, the one thing I'm kind of pissed off about is I was about to make a birdie